I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omniviewer, and it's rare for me to respond to the things that celebrities say in various interviews. I feel like there's usually enough of that going around. But I came across one article today that I just felt like I had to respond to because, my word, does it feel like its subject totally missed the point. Now, for starters, I will say something that describes the basic premise, which I'm sure will come as a shock to no one. Hayao Miyazaki hates something. Hayao Miyazaki, of course, is a world-renowned anime director who directed various films such as Spirited Away, Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind, things like that. The anime movies that come the closest to being mainstream in America, and which are hailed in the States, in Japan, in Europe, pretty much everywhere that they've seen the light of day. And his films are good. I have seen his work. I do like the stuff that he makes. But if I were to only know about that work, I would never guess that the man who actually made them is just full of bitterness and pessimism and is incredibly judgmental and just seems like an all-around unpleasant person. I don't know why he is that way. Even by the standards of what Japan expects from the roles of men and women and whatnot, it feels like he is still out of place, like an extreme example of just someone who... The only way to describe it is that Hayao Miyazaki seems really unhappy. Despite being at the top of his game, about to retire after making one last film with a respectable career behind him, and having achieved some of the highest honors a person in his field can achieve, he just seems absolutely miserable. And I would pity him if I didn't think he would take that as a personal affront. It just seems like the shorter list to make isn't the list of things that Hayao Miyazaki hates, but rather the list of things he likes. Apparently, the last film he'll be making is dedicated to his grandson, so that's at least something. But in general, Hayao Miyazaki has been earning a reputation for being one of those geniuses who's just unhappy. At least that's how he usually comes across whenever the cameras are on him. You may recall, of course, that a few years ago he famously said something that has often been quoted as anime was a mistake, not referring to the entire medium of anime, but rather referring to his role in using it as a medium to tell his stories. He has become very disillusioned with that for one reason or another. He's also been very critical about works from other nations, particularly America. And that brings us to the article I found today. Here's the article in question, in which he states what his least favorite or most despised, or however you choose to phrase it, the movies from America that he does not like, that he absolutely hates. And you know, a man doesn't have to like every single movie, whether it's a popular one or an obscure one. But after reading this article, I don't know, something about it just felt so wrong that I had to respond to it. Now, let us summarize what Hayao Miyazaki says. I'll put the excerpts up here for you so you can read them for yourselves. I'm not going to quote them word for word because I don't have them right in front of me at the moment. But basically, he speaks about how largely his distaste for America comes from America's political policies. And you know what? I'm not always a big fan of America's political policies either, whether domestic or abroad. but those change from president to president. You never know what's going to happen. But he's not really talking about America's foreign policies directly in this video. He's talking more about how it filters into entertainment. And he specifically talks about The Lord of the Rings and the Indiana Jones movies. He states that he doesn't like American movies because they reinforce the idea that America can step in and solve any problem by blowing it up. That it's all about violence and bloodshed, and like in Lord of the Rings, there's no need to distinguish between soldiers and civilians because the enemy is the enemy, and Indiana Jones is all about making foreign lands seem more bizarre and exotic and strange to Western sensibilities than it really ought to, and that it's basically just disgusting to him as a lifelong pacifist. He also claims The Lord of the Rings to be racist because the allies of Sauron are specifically based on Africa and Asia, and therefore, you know, he's not the first person to make those claims, of course, but he's certainly agreeing with them. And one of his exact quotes regarding all of this is, "If you enjoy fantasy and you don't see that, you're an idiot." That's what it says. You can see it right in front of you. Now, I subscribe to the philosophy that not every man is entitled to his own opinion. Rather, every man is entitled to his own informed opinion, meaning that your opinion had better have a good basis for it, because if it's an opinion founded on rubbish, it's not a very good opinion. So just how well informed is Hayao Miyazaki, especially when it comes to the subject he's talking about in this article? Well, that's what I am here to determine. That is what really got me thinking this article had to have some kind of response to it. All right, let's kick things off with the most obvious error he makes, and I'm assuming that the translation this article is going with is as accurate as it can be, mind you. If there's some sort of alternate translation that's different, I would like to know about it so I can run it side by side the one I initially read, but right now I'm just responding to what is written here. So, the first error that I see here is that he describes Lord of the Rings as an American story. Now, were the film adaptations produced in America by an American studio, New Line Cinema? Yes, they were. However, these movies adapt books which are inherently British. That is, in fact, what they were designed to be. All of the Middle-earth stuff was designed by J.R.R. Tolkien to be specifically British mythology for the modern era. His modern era, that is. And the film adaptations were directed by a New Zealander and featured a multinational cast. People from America, people from England, people from New Zealand, people from all over. To call it an American film that emphasizes the idea about America solving things through war, that right there means we're starting this discussion off on the wrong foot, because he has made the mistake of just kind of generalizing and thinking it's from the West, then all the West must be America, when that's not really the case. So, as I said, right off the bat, big mistake, but you know, that just one mistake can potentially be allotted if everything else he says can somehow make sense. But I'm not so sure that it does. Now, as far as his claim of racism, yes, there is a bit of a point there. J.R.R. Tolkien did not just come up with everything in Middle-earth out of a vacuum. He did base everything in there on some sort of pre-existing culture. Not necessarily as a one-to-one allegory. He wasn't playing into hard stereotypes. He wasn't necessarily doing so in order to make some kind of specific anti-whatever commentary. But he did still go to different cultures around the world for inspiration, at the very least. And yes, there are those influences from Africa and Asia that you can see in the villains who come to aid Sauron. Now, of course, the problem there is you have to then prove that J.R.R. Tolkien was himself a racist. And plenty of other people have come before me to say that Tolkien, at his worst, was no more racist than anyone else. That he lived in a culture where there were stereotypes basically all over the world. Everybody in their own specific culture viewed outside cultures as all of them are like this and all of those are like that and so on. And of course the West was not immune to that. However, when you really read the Lord of the Rings stories, any of the Middle-earth stories really, they're not so much about driving races apart as they are bringing races together. A large part of what makes the climax of Lord of the Rings work is that all the races of men come together in order to stand against evil, and that among them are elves and dwarves and hobbits and all these other races that normally would have nothing to do with each other, but in this moment, they are all allied. And Tolkien has also been famously quoted as, when he was asked if orcs can be redeemed, he thought about it and said, ultimately no one is beyond redemption. So it's not that the villains, whatever cultures they may have been based on, could not have been saved. It's just that in the context of the story, they chose not to be. They chose to throw in with evil. But that in and of itself, you cannot necessarily prove that there is any sort of connection there of him saying that because the fictional races he came up with cast their lot with the dark side, that means he thinks the same thing about real-world races. So, yes, there is inspiration there. Miyazaki got that much right, but to claim racism based on that, I do not think that really retains water. I don't think that really works. And to be honest, that's not what the Middle-earth saga is about anyway. Lord of the Rings in particular is about a bunch of other races coming together to stand against a formidable evil that otherwise would completely conquer the world and wipe everyone else out. And I can't help but feel like that's based on some sort of real-world historical event. Some moment where people from different cultures were allied together to stand against some kind of evil axis of some kind. I just can't remember, but I'm sure it will come to me. Moving on to the Indiana Jones films and the claims that they play into exoticism, I'm pretty sure World War II, that's it. That's what Lord of the Rings was serving as a metaphor for. And that was also the war in which Japan fought on the side of the Axis and were known for committing some really awful war atrocities. Anyway, moving on to the Indiana Jones aspect, I'm sure that when he's referring to the exoticism, he's most likely specifically referring to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, the second movie that's set before the first movie, making it technically a prequel. And again, you could say that maybe there is a bit of a point here, because a lot of people point especially to the dinner scene in that one palace where there's all this freaky food that's comprised of monkeys' brains and bugs and snakes and eels and everything, and it's played up as something that's freaking out all of the quote-unquote white guests in the area who are like, this is considered food? And it's often cited as one of the scenes that is, if you'll pardon me for saying, in bad taste. However, what people who often cite that scene as such often forget is that there's a later line which contextualizes that scene. It specifically says that that scene really is abnormal. Like, that's not typical Indian cuisine. It's not what the people who claim to be practicing that particular faith, that particular aspect of Hinduism or whatever they initially said it was. I'm not sure if it was strictly Hinduism, but it's been a while since I've seen the movie. But they specifically claim that's not the diet they would be practicing. Something is abnormal about this. Something is weird with the Thuggee. And speaking of which, the Thuggee are a real group of people who, while not necessarily the way they were portrayed in the pulpy Indiana Jones movie, were still known for being violent and very deadly if you ever came across them. There's a reason the word thug is derived from that name, Thuggee. Different pronunciation, I know, but whatever. So what we're looking at here is a group of people, villains, yes, native to a particular region of the world, yes, but not representative of those people. To quote John Crichton from Farscape, they're a bastard sect in any religion. And a lot of people overlook that. They're overlooking that we are not meant to see this as normal, but we're not meant to see it as representing India either. In fact, it's made pretty clear that the Thuggee are horrible to the rest of India. So, again, odd that that would be overlooked. Now, the movie also does open with a scene in China where Indiana Jones is dealing with a Chinese crime lord to get a particular artifact. We sort of open towards the end of that particular adventure, which kicks off the beginning of that particular one. And, okay, Chinese crime lord, whatever. China has crime lords the same as every other country that's come that far, really. And Short Round, yes, there are people who find him annoying, but I don't really think... He wasn't meant to be a bad character. He was meant to be a cute kid. It didn't necessarily play off that well, but I don't necessarily believe that any of the hatred that people feel for Short Round, or maybe just the mild unamusement with him, has anything to do with the fact that he's a little Asian kid. More to do with the fact that he's a little kid. But again, Temple of Doom, not really the film most people would put as the favorite Indiana Jones movie. You'll find people these days who say it's better than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and leagues ahead of what that upcoming 5th movie has been reported to be, if the leaks are true. But still, of the original trilogy, it's considered the weak entry. More and more people are starting to appreciate what it did these days, but still, most people, when you ask what the best ones are, they'll say Raiders of the Lost Ark or Last Crusade. And that is very important because in those two films, we see that there is a particular group in those movies which are caricatured. And they are treated very differently, and we are meant to be looking at them with spite, and we are meant to laugh at them in a form of mockery. Do you know what group that is? Come closer to the screen so I can whisper it to you. The Nazis. Yeah, the movies are specifically mocking the Nazis. Unlike, say, Darth Vader in the Star Wars films, the Nazis in the Indiana Jones movies are not cool villains. They're not villains that we kind of think, hey, I'd be one of them. They got cool uniforms, they got the baddest mother on their side. Yeah, that's a team I want to join. No, they are considered such ridiculous people worthy of scorn, and they die in such over-the-top ways that if you shifted the tone of the movie just a little, it would be laugh-out-loud funny. Some of these deaths, if it weren't for the blood, wouldn't look out of place in a Roadrunner and Coyote cartoon. They are not meant to be admired. They are meant to be admonished. Rightfully so, because, you know, they're Nazis. In fact, it is commonly accepted by fans and scholars alike that Raiders of the Lost Ark is essentially a Jewish revenge story. Now, even though the movie is set in 1938, and even though the beings that come out of the Ark at the end are meant to be, in context, angels or avatars of Yahweh's divine wrath, in a meta-context, they are intended to be the spirits of people who died in the Holocaust, coming back to exact divine retribution on the people who killed them. That was on record as being the intent behind that scene. Again, in context, it's got a different explanation. But in terms of allegory, that was the story. And in fact, Raiders of the Lost Ark completely goes against the idea that Indiana Jones is a hero who is the all-American who comes in, shoots the bad guys, and solves every problem. Because in fact, at the conclusion of the film, okay, I will acknowledge, he does shoot his fair amount of bad guys in that movie. It is, there's no debating that. And he doesn't just shoot them, there are other ways he kills them as well. Not all of those people are non-white individuals, again, quite a few of them are Nazis, but like, you look at the trail that Indy leaves behind him, there's a lot of damage caused. There is the common belief these days that he doesn't actually have any impact on the plot in Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's not true, but I don't want to get too off topic here. The thing is, he causes so much damage in his pursuit of the Ark that it kind of undermines Hayao Miyazaki's supposed point already, until you get to a certain point that completely undercuts what Miyazaki is saying. There comes a moment where Indy potentially thinks he can solve the problem by causing destruction. You remember, the Nazis are on the island, they're marching the Ark up to the site where they're going to open it, and Indy appears, he's got the high ground, and he's got a bazooka aimed right at the Ark, and he says he's going to blow it up. If he blows it up, the Nazis can't do anything with the Ark at all. But he gets talked out of it, and it turns out that being talked out of it and not solving the problem with shooting a gun is the right call. Because again, it leads to that finale where Yahweh, through the iconic Jewish artifact, exacts revenge on the people who slaughtered his chosen society. So, yeah, what movie exactly did Hayao Miyazaki see in that case? Because I don't think it was Indiana Jones, or if it was, he probably wasn't paying attention. So let's get back to that original question. If every man is entitled to his informed opinion, I asked how informed Hayao Miyazaki was about these movies. I can only conclude that he's not. Because when you take everything into account, when you take his own perception of things about how these works are just stories about America solving everything through war, which he is ardently against, and you line them up with the actual authorial intent and the content of the stories and all the other allegories and metaphors and cultural aspects that filter into them, Miyazaki comes across like he's completely clueless in this case. I mean, he was obviously going in with a bit of prejudice because he doesn't like America in a general sense. Then again, he barely tolerates his own son on a good day by some testimonies. So make of that what you will. But at the same time, I don't feel like this should go unchallenged because people listen to Miyazaki. And Miyazaki has just demonstrated here, well, he's engaging in two logical fallacies that I can think of. First and most obviously is cherry picking, where he's specifically taking certain elements from these stories and using them to prove his point while ignoring all the other stuff in there that doesn't prove his point. He just wants the stuff that will support him, not the stuff that contradicts him. But he's also engaging in what is called the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. Now, I've mentioned that fallacy before, but for those of you who are new to the channel and don't want to go digging to see what that video is, I will elaborate. The Texas sharpshooter fallacy goes like this. A man walks up to the broadside of a barn, whips out a gun, and shoots it full of holes. Then he goes up to the wall and starts painting targets around each hole, always making sure that the bullet holes he left behind before are dead center of each one. Then once he's done, he calls everyone over to the wall and says, "Look, I got a bullseye every time I fired. I'm the best sharpshooter in the land." Now he can claim that, and he wants everyone to think that, but in actuality, he's deceiving everyone because he worked backwards. He didn't actually shoot a bullseye, he just shot randomly and somehow tried positioning a bullseye around it. And I kind of think that's what Miyazaki is doing here. He's already decided he hates these movies, but it's not enough for him to simply say, I just don't like them, or it's just part of my general hatred for America, please leave me alone. He has to have some sort of justification for it. So he comes up with a justification, one that I'm sure would get attention, and therefore starts working backwards to try and force these works around that particular justification. He makes all these claims of racism, exoticism, imperialism, and the like, and then tries framing these works around those claims to make it look like he's correct, when in actuality, he has no clue what he's talking about. Again, I've seen his work, I respect him as a storyteller, but here he's off the mark, and I'm sorry, but I think his opinion in this regard is totally worthless, because it's not accurate. None of it is accurate. I may as well go the whole 9 yards and say it outright. Hayao Miyazaki claiming that Lord of the Rings and Indiana Jones are stories about how America believes that they can solve every problem through violence in foreign lands, hang the consequences, and shooting the foreigners, and how horrible that is. Well, that's akin to if I said something like Kiki's Delivery Service or Castle in the Sky were just examples of Chinese fetish cartoons where the camera was always angled to look up some teenage girl's dress. It shows a gross misunderstanding of the works specifically, the medium in general, and the cultures from which both the works and the medium hail from. Not to mention, it's a provably false statement. Now, the difference is, I don't actually believe that. I said that hypothetically, but I don't actually believe that about Hayao Miyazaki's films, or anime in general. But Hayao Miyazaki, what he said, he does believe it. If I believed he was at all interested in having an actual dialogue about this and being open to possibly seeing things from a different perspective, I might not make such a big deal out of it. Based on what I've read, though, I am of the impression that he is not interested in that. He's made up his mind, and he's found a really weird way of trying to make people listen. I don't know why he felt like he had to say all of this stuff when he simply could have said, I just don't like it, but here we are. Yeah, it's a really good thing that I can usually separate the artist from his work, because if I couldn't, I'm not sure I could ever watch another Miyazaki movie again. Not knowing what I know about the man, not knowing how miserable and bitter he is, or at least how miserable and bitter he's become. I don't know if he was always this way, but he certainly is this way now. And it's unfortunate, really. I wish it weren't that way. I wish he were happier. Not just because I want him to like these movies, but just because I don't want anyone to be miserable. And yet, that's where he chooses to live. So, yeah, I just had to say something about this. I'm not calling for Hayao Miyazaki's cancellation or the banning of his films. All of that would be pointless. The man's about to retire anyway, and his movies are good movies that have nothing to do with how he acts on a personal level with people. But at the same time, like, I've heard some bad takes in my time, but this one takes the cake, and coming from someone as respected as Miyazaki, it's baffling. Really, really baffling. But I just had to say my piece on it, so maybe you guys have some thoughts on it as well. I don't think that we should start attacking Miyazaki, of course. I don't think we should go start sending him letters or tweets or whatever, demanding that he change his mind or something. If he doesn't like the movies, whatever. That's technically no skin off my nose, but let's come back to that original quote. He said, if you enjoy fantasy and you don't see the things that he sees, you're an idiot. Well, Hayao, many of us idiots all over the world enjoy these fantasies and come away with completely different interpretations than you did. Interpretations which actually line up with what we see, as opposed to your interpretations which line up with what you want to see. Personally, I don't think that makes us idiots. And of course, I'm not doing the inverse and claiming that you're an idiot either, but I do think in this case, Hayao Miyazaki, you're being ignorant. And you're being dismissive. And quite frankly, you're being a little prejudiced in your own right, considering that you're the one who's claiming prejudice on part of America and its cinema. Well, in old age, we often become the things we hate the most. Well, guess that's about all I have to say. I'll leave a link to the article so you can read it for yourself to see if there's anything I might have missed or maybe something I misread. I don't think I did. I read over it several times. And if there is another translation, one that's actually different, maybe that provides more context or quotes that may have been omitted or something, I would love to know about them because maybe that'll shed a little more light on things. But otherwise, I just had to say my piece and now I'm done. Again, I like Miyazaki's films, but Miyazaki the man is someone I hope finds peace one day. Until such time as we meet again, this is the OmniViewer signing off. Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books, Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.